Hi there, welcome to our second class of the Medallion Quilt Class series. So last month we did the Lone Star block, and then this month we're going to add the first border around the Lone Star. If you look over here, this is what it's going to look like. We're going to do rows of square in a square blocks and a sashing piece around the star. So I decided to add the navy sashing around the star, and then for the next row on this one I'm going to do the red square in the square blocks, and then I think I'm going to add red sashing after that. So I'm going to just kind of continue my colors, adding the sashing to whatever the previous row what color was. If you're doing more of a scrappy look like I did on this star, I would just audition different colors for your next sashing. I'm going to go with the red. So before you begin, just kind of think about what your sashing you want it to be, and then what you want your next row to be, whether you want it to be just kind of all one color tone or use a scrappy look. Just kind of think about that before you begin. So we are going to start with making the square in the square blocks. You all should have received this pattern. I will send it out on email as well. You can drop in the office and grab one. So you will need 24 of the center part of the square in the square. So this can be all the same color. It can be whatever you want it to be and whatever you want your quilt to look like. So you can do that. So these are going to be 3 3/8 inch pieces, okay, square. Then you're going to cut 48 squares of 3 1/4 inch. So what I did was cut 3 with the fabric, 3 1/4 inch, and I cut 4, 4, and then I should have put that on the pattern, and then subcut 3 1/4, and then cut them in half diagonal. So you will have 96 of these triangle pieces. You'll need 4 for each of these squares. Last time in our class we talked about starching our fabric. So I did starch these because this is on the bias, and it just helps keep things all square and nice to starch it. So just take a few minutes, starch your fabric before you cut it, and I just feel like it just works out really well to have that starching, especially on these bias edges. Okay, so to begin, we're going to take 2 of our triangle pieces and one of our squares. Now, before you start sewing all 24, I would like you to just make one and make sure it works out with your seam allowance. So usually we say do a scant 1/4 inch, but on these I found a generous 1/4 inch works the best. So I would suggest make one with your generous 1/4 inch and then go from there. If it works, keep going. You can do chain piecing. If not, kind of adjust so that it's going to work. And I'm going to show you what you need to have to make it work. So, but to begin with, we're going to find the center of this long edge, and you can either just do a crease with your fingers or put a pin there and pin each side. I like to just pin each side on the center. Okay, and then this side the same thing. Okay, notch up those creases, put a pin, and then sew your generous 1/4 inch on each side. Okay. Okay, and then you're going to press it to your background piece. Okay, once you have that pressed, you're going to add 2 more of your triangle pieces on the opposite sides. So again, find the center and pin. And again, your generous 1/4 inch seam. Okay, once you have those sewn on, this is what it will look like. It'll be, have your dog ears and all stuff, but no worries, we're going to trim it down to 4.5 inches. I like to use a 4.5 inch square. If you don't have a 4.5 inch square, you can also use just a basic ruler if you have a bigger square, but you want to measure 4.5 inches. Okay. One thing to note, and this is where your seam allowance, how important that is, comes into play. We want 1/4 inch outside of this square. So I'm going to center this. So I'm going to center 2 1/4. You can see 2 1/4 here, 2 1/4 here, 2 1/4, and then right there's my 1/4 inch, right? There's my 1/4 inch. So this works out that I just have that 1/4 inch beyond each of these points, and now I can trim around each side and get my 4.5 inch square, and I know it's perfectly centered, and I have that 1/4 inch on each point, so that when I go to sew, I'm not cutting off a point. I don't have like a lot of extra room there, and then it will fit when we add it to our borders. All right, so trim that. If it doesn't quite fit, you're just going to have to adjust a little bit, move your needle over, or whatever you need to do to make that fit. This center square is 2 7/8. So if that helps a little bit to know what that should be, that it's 2 7/8 inches square. And then that worked for me to do the 1/4 inch on each side. So again, do 1 to begin, and then once you have your settings right to where your 1/4 inch needs to be, then you can continue and do the rest, the other 23. Okay, I just hit you to do all 24, and then it's a little bit off, and then you have to redo. So do 1, do a test one, make sure you're good, and then you continue making all the blocks, okay? So once you have all of your square in the square blocks finished, you can start sewing them together. I like to match the seams so that these corner pieces are even. So I like to put a pin right in that corner and then go to the back and find the exact corner there. Okay. And then sew your 1/4 inch. I like to sew just barely above that intersection of those 2 stitching, and then when you turn it over, I'll show you on these pieces. Then they're all matching up. Okay, so as you sew these together, first off, I would, depending on what colors you've chosen or what your blocks are, if you want to lay them out in whatever order that looks good to you. And so on this side, we're going to have 5. So we're going to sew 5 of the little blocks together. And same as this side. And then we're going to have 7 on each of these sides, okay? But before we sew those on, we're going to attach your sashing pieces. So these are 1.5 inches wide. Now, this block should measure 18.5 inches. If it does not measure 18.5 inches, we can adjust a little bit. What we want is this center block with the sashing to be 20.5 inches on all sides. Then these will attach nicely. If this is a little off, it's okay. Let's just look at it and say you're 18.25, you're just a little bit short, then we would make these to be like 1/4 inch more. So it'd be 1 3/4. So it's okay if we need to adjust on those sashing pieces. It's most important to adjust now on each step than to like be really off once we get out into our other borders. So if you have any questions, let me know and I can help you figure that out. Or if you're a little big, you can go a little bit shorter. But usually most of us tend to go a little, it ends up being a little smaller than what it should be. And that's totally fine. We can adjust. Just make sure once we add these little sashing pieces that we're 20.5 inches, okay? So we'll pin, like to pin, and then I also like to sew from this side so that I can see where I need to be with those intersections so I don't cut off my points. So I'm just right above that point. So sew across 1/4 inch on both sides and then press to the sashing piece. Pressing to the sashing piece just makes this just lay flat. We're not bending back again. So if we can keep that flat, that helps. And then after we get those pressed back, then we'll add the other 2 sides. Okay, and do the same thing, press to the sashing piece. All right, so once we get that on, then we can start adding our pieced border. And so the same thing, we'll add this here, sew along this edge so that you're right under that intersection so we're not cutting off points. Okay, I like to match each end, and then also I like to match this center. So the point on this center block should match where this seam is, just to keep everything kind of centered and straight. So I like to pin here and the center and then the end again, and then you can kind of pin in between. Sometimes there might be a little fullness in one side or the other, and if it's just a little bit, you can just kind of pin it nicely and then sew it, and it should fit okay. Okay, so both opposite sides sew together and press towards the sashing again. So you're going to have both of your fabrics coming back in. Maybe I can show you on here where they're pressed into the sashing on the back. So all of these pieces just continue to lay flat, and we're not pressing again back on to all that bulk, okay? All right, and then one last thing, when you're doing this border, I would like you to match the corner seam here. So the end, the corner seam, this will be sewn on, and then the corner seam down here, and then the end, and also the center. So your center will match up with this. Okay, and then this total block now will be 28.5 inches square. So just kind of keep in your mind where you need to be, because we're just at each row we will need to kind of keep consistent. And of course, if we're off a little bit, we can always, with these little sashing pieces, make it right again. So no worries if we're a little off. If you're a little off with these, you might need to go make a little bigger seam or not quite as big a seam, but So this one should be 28 and a half. This one should be, let me think, 4 times 5, 20, yeah, 20 and a half. And then everything should fit perfectly. I hope you have fun doing this row. It's really fun to see it start to come together. And we will see you next month on our second row.